Hello and welcome back to Rehydrate. This season, we'll be reading and discussing Liu Cixin's Das End, the third and final part of the Remembrance of Earth Past series. This is Season 5, Episode 7, Our Star, covering the sixth and final part of the book. We've previously discussed the three-body problem and the Dark Forest, and all of the hosts have read the entire series. My name is Dan, and I've read the entire series.
This is Tim, and this is my first time reading the entire series.
This is Amin. This is also my first time reading the series, and along with Dan and Talia, I co-hosted the Rehydrate spoiler cast. So if you've been reading along with us and you want to dive much more deeply into some of the sections, you should go back and check those out too.
And my name is Talia. As Amin just said, I've been the co-host of the spoiler cast, so this is my first time on the main show, having read the entire series before and very recently, so we can wrap up this long trilogy.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Talia. Just another note about the show itself. Like I mentioned before, we're going to be diving almost immediately back into the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov. We'll be covering the first three books that were written in chronological order. So the series there's 7 books in the series, and some of them are prequels, but these are like the original 3 books of the Foundation trilogy that include Foundation and Empire, and Second Foundation. So the reading list is up on the website if you'd like to read along with us or just listen. This will be, like I said, the final episode for the Remembrance Earth Past trilogy. And, even though it's a shorter amount of reading, there's still a lot that happens at the end of the book here. So let's go into the summary. So we start out with AA trying to comfort Changxin about her role in the destruction of the solar system as they make their way 287 light years away to DX 3906. That takes roughly 52 hours in their frame of reference. Upon landing on the more habitable planet in the system, which they call Planet Blue, they are greeted by the civilian cosmologist who was aboard Gravity hundreds of years ago, Guan Yifan. He's not sure what happened to the Trisolaran fleets or Yun Tianming, but he received the broadcast from Halo and was there to meet them and take them back to one of the worlds that the galactic humans had founded. Even though this part of space is dangerous, Changxin insists on waiting for Yun Tianming, and when Yifan's ship detects activity on a nearby planet, Changxin accompanies him to investigate. While en route, Yifan tells Changxin about the grim realities of the universe, including that the civilizations routinely use the laws of physics as a means of attack, often dimensional attacks. Some civilizations even found a way to live in lower dimensions while attacking ones in higher dimensions, just as a means of survival at any cost. Finally, he tells her the theory that the universe was once 10-dimensional and light speed approached infinity, but the endless dimensional attacks had brought the universe to its current state. They reach planet Gray and see 5 black lines radiating from the planet, which Guan Yifan calls death lines. These lines are made from extremely advanced curvature propulsion engines, and the speed of light inside them is nearly 0, and they have a possibility of rupturing, especially when they come in contact with other curvature propulsion trails. He recommends that they get away from them as quickly as possible. They make their way back to Planet Blue, and they receive a message from AA saying that Yun Tianming is there with her, and he has brought even another grander gift. Changxin is awestruck as they make their way down to the planet, but the reunion is not meant to be, as the death lines rupture and they find themselves traveling at the new, slower speed of light in the reduced light speed black hole or black domain that was caused by the rupture. Because computers can't work at reduced light speed, Guan Yifan needs to start the process of booting the slower but heavily paralyzed neural computer to help them bring the life support back online. This process takes over 12 days, so they will need to temporarily hibernate again to preserve oxygen. This process is ultimately successful, but it comes at a great cost, as they have now traveled at the new speed of light for almost 19 million years, meaning that Changxin's chance to meet with Yun Tianming has long since passed. Changxin and Guan Yifan are able to reduce their speed and make their way down to the planet to search for any signs. When Changxin remembers what Luoji had taught her in AA, that the only way to preserve a message over great spans of time was for words carved into stone, and they eventually find a message left to them from AA and Yun Tianming. We lived a happy life together. We give you a little. Survive the collapse inside. Go to the new. They find a rectangular doorway on the planet, and upon entering it, they are greeted by Sofan and their own pastoral pocket universe. The hope is that they will be able to stay in the mini-universe outside of time until the universe has a chance to reset with another Big Bang, and they're able to experience the Edenic 10-dimensional universe. During their stay in the mini-universe, they receive a broadcast from a faction called the Returners, who say that the universe will not be able to reset due to the mass that has been taken out of it into the pocket universes. and the only way to allow it to happen is to return the mass to the main universe. Cheng Xin and Guan Yifan decide to dismantle their universe and return the mass with the hope that there is enough inhabitants of other pocket universes to do the same to save the universe from the eventual heat death. The three of them take out a ship and set to exploring, leaving only behind a databank of human and Trisolaran knowledge and a self-sustaining fishbowl that will travel outside to the new universe. Yeah, so maybe let's just start with initial impressions.
Well, this is definitely not how I imagined it would end.
I think you had originally said way back that it was going to be one person on a planet alone. And it's sort of, it's two people.
Did I really?
Yeah, you said like way back, like your kind of your idea, your thought of like what's going to happen is like maybe there's one person left on the Earth, right? Yeah, that's not exactly what happens, but it's interesting. It was an interesting take, I think.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about the overall course of bleakness that the series was on.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot happens here. I'm not sure entirely how I feel about it, other than I kind of admire him for taking the story to the largest scope possible, and dealing with the collapse of the universe itself.
Yeah.
There's some parts that seem pretty contrived along the way, like with these things rupture, these death lines. Well, they have the possibility to rupture, and of course they rupture at the worst possible time, to kind of throw this kind of cruel wrench into, which seems to me almost like a final little cruelty to Cheng Xin, that she kind of ends up with this rando that I don't remember. And not Yun Tianming.
Yeah, and I think like the even more cruel part is that Yun Tianming probably made it happen. So one of the things I was noting in my read here is like, so they mentioned like curvature propulsion lines will have the possibility of rupturing the death lines, and they even say like later on, I pulled out some of the quotes early on. They say, "What kind of disturbance make them spread?" Cheng Xin asked. She turned to give the death lines another glance. Behind them, the 5 death lines cast long shadows that stretched across the plain to the horizon. We're not sure. Some theories suggest the appearance of curvature trails nearby would cause a disturbance. We've confirmed that the curvature trails within a short distance can influence each other. And then later on, they say, "How did he get here so fast?" Cheng Xin muttered as if still dreaming. So when she gets back to Planet Blue, like, well, where did he come from? And then later on, after the death lines rupture, it said, was it due to the disturbance from Tianming's ship? Perhaps. He didn't know the death lines were here. So yeah, it's doubly heartbreaking that one, they don't meet together, and two, that Yun Tianming actually accidentally made it happen, probably.
He could have written this in a different way, where Cheng Xin and Yun Tingming finally reunite, and they end up being the ones that, like get stuck in a pocket dimension and see the end of the universe. And I don't know if that would have been, how fans generally take this, if that would have been more cliched or seen as more cliched in a series that's, kind of a little thin on kind of touching character moments, like I think that might have been a better ending. I guess I wonder what your guys' take is on that.
I kind of agree with Tim about how you admire Cixin Liu for expanding the scope, especially when you consider what you just outlined, how easy it would have been to write this ending. We fly to our star, we have our date. Yun Tianming had his glow up and became a spacefaring vegan, and then he shares the little universe with her. But it's not the way it happens. And in fact, we have to push ourselves and imagine the laws. I mean, it's hard to imagine that reunion would have talked about the laws of physics being used as weapons, and it would have been much more tempting to have just sort of a kitschy, let me tell you all these cool new space toys that the Trisolarans have invented, as opposed to probing into something. I don't know if it's darker, but it's certainly like deeper the way that this ending is piloted.
Yeah, I think it's a final expression of how indifferent the universe is to any of our fates, and that it's preserving our fates is something we have to do through sheer effort alone, and no one's going to help us. But I do think there could have been a slightly different ending where the ruptures happen and she gets stuck in the pocket dimension. The same thing happens just with Yun Tianming. And again, it just seems like a little cruel to the character itself to not
Yeah.
have that happen. As kind of creepy and problematic as the beginning of their relationship and how it started is, it's a little dark for the ending.
I agree with Tim, and I think the like they just mentioned it in passing that AA and Yin Min were, they were spending their days together. I think that would have been shifting perspective. Like I was more interested in what they ended up doing, because not that there's anything wrong with her, but Cheng is just a less interesting character to me. So like to spend a bunch of time with her, and then like Tim said, this other guy who I barely remember would have been less interesting to me. But yeah, I think everything Tim and Talia said, I agree with.
I just would have been a little more interested in maybe, yeah, like having some time with Yun Tianming, and like the book picked his brain and his experiences a bit more. It's not that like I was that invested in, Cheng Xin and Yun Tianming having their, final picnic together and having their moment. Like introducing this fourth character. It's a little cruel to AA too, because she kind of had a hot, she kind of had the hots for him. So
Yeah.
But
it's not purely introducing. I didn't catch this until my reread, but he was actually, in my opinion, kind of the most interesting character in the Gravity Blue Space. The chapters we spent with them. He's the
Right.
cosmologist who, drifts into the fourth dimensional space for the first time. And I think we all agree that, talking about 4D was one of the highlights of their space voyage. I would advise rereading to see his character.
Yeah, it's part of that is the consequence of reading these several weeks apart. So I kind of lost any sort of connection to his character. Then.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so personally, I think I like this choice more, just because, I think it would have been a little bit too cliche if it was just Changxin and Yun Tianming meeting after so long, like, because that's kind of what you expect, right? Throughout the whole book is that, like, especially when she leaves Pluto and they finally have curvature propulsion and they can get to the new system, it seems like, all right, well, they're going to meet up and they're going to have a life together and restart the human race, but then like the cruel reality of the universe like kind of intervenes and doesn't really care about their relationship. And we're also not exposed to too much information about the Trisolarans, which I think is also an interesting choice, maybe good, maybe bad. But we also get a lot of perspective from the galactic humans, from Guan Yifan, about like what kind of the new state of the universe is, or the expanded understanding of the universe has. And I think like the conversation they had on the way to Planet Gray was great. How he's like, do you really want to know this stuff? She's like, yeah, I want to know. And then he tells her a bunch of stuff about the universe, and then she's like, oh man, the universe is pretty bleak. Anyway, I appreciate the choice he made to not make it just a kind of more cliche love story at the end, and kind of sticks to its guns of what the kind of the theme of the entire series is. So speaking of like the kind of just bleakness, I pulled a bit more quotes, but and I, like I said, I really like this conversation between Changxin and Guan Yifan when they're going to Planet Gray to investigate it, and they say, for us, the dark forest state is all important, but it's just a detail of the cosmos. If you think the cosmos is a great battlefield, dark forest strikes are nothing more than snipers shooting at careless messengers, messmen, etc. In the grand scheme of the battle, they are nothing. You have not seen what true interstellar war is like. That's right, the universal laws of physics are the most terrifying weapons, and they're also the most effective defenses, whether it's by the Milky Way or the Andromeda Galaxy, at the scale of the local galactic group or the Virgo supercluster. Those warring civilizations possessing godlike technology will not hesitate to use the universal laws of physics as weapons. So I think one of my bigger things that I'd like to hear more about the story, like if there was a sequel, there's not going to be, but if there happened to be a sequel, is like kind of more about like this universe and the state of the actual like interstellar war and like what that actually looks like. So when one of my interviews that somebody asked me, it might have been Talia, I don't remember, if there's anything that I wish there was more of, and like that's the thing that I thought of as if more about the kind of state of the actual universe.
That seems like a real tall order for
definitely
for any individual author to render.
For sure. Would you guys like to see more about that though? Like, did you feel like it was lacking in any detail, or was there just enough detail to get you interested, or are you just not interested in that part at all?
I mean, I don't think he should have expounded on that more here, because it's very difficult to see the shape that that story would take, or the. So I think here it just kind of like it leaves just enough mystery and kind of just leaves enough to the imagination that I think is, I think he kind of got it just right here.
I think it's all about choices. I mean, I think that the author does grapple with the entire universe because this character who survives to the end, Guan Yifen, he's a cosmologist. I mean, we have a lot of scientists throughout this whole trilogy, but cosmology is fairly contemplative. Most people don't think of it as very applicable or functional because you're speculating about the past couple billions of years. And Guan Yifen is the only person who kind of gives a perspective of peace and calmness when they're trapped forever, knowing that they have to live the rest of their lives inside a black hole, not of their choosing. He just says, I was driven mad wondering about all of the possibilities of the great universe. Now I don't have to worry about that. So his scope shrinks and he's like, okay, this is the new perspective. This is what I'll focus on. Because I don't think it is possible to satisfyingly explore a universe that big. Eventually you have to make some kind of a choice.
Yeah, and I think if the Trisolarans had been introduced with, Yun Tianming, maybe that would have expanded the scope too much. It would have made the book 3 times longer or something. Because, Liu Cixin wouldn't be able to help himself, right?
Yeah, I think where the series ends up, from Guan Yifen's perspective, you're going to see the end of the universe as we know it anyway. So even those godlike civilizations and powers are still reduced to just something that's just going to get sucked back into the singularity, and it's like they were never there unless they created a pocket dimension. I guess we'll get to it, but this idea of the pocket dimensions was really interesting to me, and of like mass being removed from the universe, preventing its actual collapse.
Yeah.
But I'd liked that. He kind of, there's a short passage where he kind of addresses the question of like, why is the universe actually going to collapse and not expand forever the way we understand it in our current time. And I think he just kind of says that there's just way more dark matter in the universe than we know of.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that we essentially have to literally have to shovel the dirt of this pocket universe back into the regular universe, otherwise it's not going to be massive enough to collapse in on itself, was
right. Yeah.
a really interesting thing to me.
Yeah, and what are the tolerances, right? Like she leaves behind the 5 kilogram data bank and fishbowl. Like, is that enough? Hopefully, hopefully there's still enough to do it, and hopefully enough people will also do it. But let's get to the very ending in a bit. Sure. There's still a lot that happens prior to that. One of the more interesting things that I thought was when they actually get stuck in the death line after they rupture. I keep saying rapture. After they rupture, how they have to reconfigure their computers to work, and just the kind of relativistic theory behind all that stuff around how the ship is now going at light speed, and even though it's slower at light speed, but the maximum speed of the universe at that point is still the slower light speed, and that's why the planet underneath goes so fast. I think all that stuff was really fascinating. And kind of looking into a little bit more, I found a video game that MIT put out. It's called A Slower Speed of Light. It makes a simulation of what would be if light did slow down to the point where you could walk at the speed of light, and what it would look like. So I really recommend people check that out. I'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, some of the interesting effects around time dilation and the contraction. When you go forward at the speed of light, things look really far away, and then the colors start shifting, and then things start bending in weird ways because the speed of the photons is the same as light speed, so they just look different and they're different colors. Anyway, I don't know. Did you guys get a chance to look at that?
Yeah, I watched it. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I didn't play the game, but I watched the video.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good demonstration about what the speed of light actually does to people's perceptions. I don't know, it helped me understand it better.
It was nice to see just even really simple principles that we already understand actually applied, just something as simple as the Doppler effect. We all experience it in sound when you go by a siren and it seems like the frequency of the sound is changing. But actually, like, the red-blue shift would happen for our visible light if you happen to be traveling at or very near light speed. So I thought, it's these deft little details that he builds in, even if he takes some creative liberties, that sort of make me smile.
That said, the question I had while watching that video was, if you were slowing down the entire, like slowing down that constant, reducing that constant, essentially, your brain is also firing on its electrical impulses. So your brain is essentially slowing down as well. So if you're, like the speed of light was just slowing down, would your experiences within that universe like change at all? Because you would still, like, your relative ability to move would still be relative to everything else. So
Well, would your brain move slower though? Because, like, as far as I understand it, and I'm not a physicist, but as far as I understand it, like, it's just like the maximum speed of the universe has now changed, and light happens to go at the maximum speed of the universe, right? So, but you can't go beyond that. But our brains don't go at the speed of light, and that's where they're able to use that. Yeah, they're able to use the neural computers because they go at a slower speed similar to our brains, but they're just like heavily parallelized. So that's why I didn't think that would impact us at all, because like nothing in our body moves fast, anywhere close to the speed of light.
It would impact. I mean, Changxin and Guan Yifan do wonder, like, how is fusion still happening? How is the sun able to emit heat and light? So I think there's a little hand waving, like maybe the speed of light is the same inside this massive, sun, which, I mean, could happen. There's a lot of theories. Not that I'm a physicist, but I think there are theories that inside the hyperpressurized, centers of suns, matter takes on different forms or maybe follows different rules. But I don't think it would affect humans all that much. I don't think there's many examples in fiction where there's slower light speed, but if you read Terry Pratchett on Discworld, I think they do have hints or maybe outright statements that talk about how their speed of light is pretty slow as well. Like, you can see the sunset creeping up, like the light, you can see it come and hit your eyes, if that makes sense.
I still wonder if the synapses in your brain, are connected by electrical impulses, which electricity moves at.
I think it doesn't. I think it moves slower.
Synapses are pretty slow. I've worked for the summer. I worked in a neurobiology lab. Like, we can intercept them. They're pretty slow.
So we're saying, the speed at which our brains happen.
They seem fast.
Fires it is I mean, yes, is fast, but is still so much slower than the speed of light.
Compared to the speed of light, it's super slow.
I mean, unless if the speed of light slows down, then everything else relatively slows down with it.
Would it? I think it's just the maximum.
Yeah. It's just like, and that's why when they're traveling really fast, right? Much faster than the reduced light speed black hole. And then so they get stuck now at what's called light speed, right? They first get stopped, right? They find like that big jarring when they actually hit the reduced light speed. But their ship is still traveling at what's now the new light speed, but the planet below is still orbiting at like really slow light speeds, and that's why they, because like they're traveling at quote unquote light speed, that the planet below goes so many years into the future.
Frank mentioned in the Singer chapter that he liked it because it wrapped up so many of the mysteries from the previous 3 books, and I find that this chapter does as well. When Guan Yifan mentions that the entire universe is inside, or a solar system, whatever is inside a reduced light speed black hole, then the known constant C will change, like a constant will change, which sounds paradoxical, but it finally wraps up a metaphor from really early in the first book in 3-Body Problem. We talk early on about a turkey farmer and a shooter. If you remember that, I pulled the quote. It says, in the shooter hypothesis, a good marksman shoots at a target, creating a hole every 10 centimeters. Now suppose the surface of the target is inhabited by intelligent 2-dimensional creatures. Their scientists, after observing the universe, discover a great law. There exists a hole in the universe every 10 centimeters. They have mistaken the result of the marksman's momentary whim for an unalterable law of the universe. When I first read that in 3-Body, I was like, okay, but why mention it? And now it's wrapped up and we understand, like, we see these constants as constant, but in fact, it's just the winds of these type 3 civilizations, like flicking attacks at each other.
And they even talk about like how our speed of light, our c is even slower than what it actually was in the beginning of the universe, right? Or even hopefully in the new one, as that it's near infinity in the new one. So our light speed would be super slow to the people, and then like they say later on, like they would reduce the speed of light and like wouldn't even notice. They would just figure that that's the speed of light and take it as law. That's a good callback.
Yeah, I think that's why I forget his name, but the character from the previous section
Wang Miao?
was the previous. No, it was a one-off character, but the one section about and again, it's a consequence of reading these, several weeks apart and all that. But the one character whose kind of brain kind of melts down because I think he comes to the realization that the
by
the
ice.
laws, yeah, the
when he has a dream about Dingy.
yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
But it's intimated that he's essentially kind of going insane in his dream because he comes to
he took the
due
red
to the
pill.
realization that the universe's constants are not constant, and can be
so
fungible.
Why bother studying them?
Right, and then like physics, all this. We've been studying something that's just
a whim, basically.
Yeah, maybe that's what's causing all the suicides, like way back, right? Like not only did they realize that that physics is not what they thought it was, and that the constants aren't what maybe they have like the same realization that Dingy does, and that's why early on in 3-body problem, all those scientists commit suicide.
Yeah, we're just studying what one civilization turned the dial to for our sector of the universe.
That's right.
So another thing, speaking of going back to the game and to the Doppler effect. So I don't know if it's an explicit 2001 reference, but it definitely reminded me of the sequence in 2001 where they go through the gate and all the colors shift, but like the world looks kind of similar. So the quote I pulled that says, the yacht had landed in the middle of blue grassland, not too far away. They could see the rolling mountains covered by snow. The landing site was near the foot of a mountain range. The sky was a light yellow, like the ocean when viewed from space. The light red sun shone in the sky. It was noon on planet Blue, and the sky and the sun's colors made it resemble the dusk on Earth. So that section, they're not going through the gate, and it's not because of the Doppler effect, but just the shifting in colors from planet Blue, just kind of like opposite of what our colors are, just reminded me of that sequence from 2001. And then I also wonder if the Pocket Universe itself is a reference to 2001, just a room that's kind of outside of time and where the laws of time don't really have the same meaning and just seems really self-contained. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's also a reference, but when I read it this time, I was looking for 2001 references, and I think that might be one.
I don't remember enough about 2001 to.
Oh man, you should rewatch it.
I know, I really should.
You should rewatch it every couple years.
It's been 25 years, I think.
Yeah, they call it about the room. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but now that you mentioned it, that makes complete sense. I mean, it makes complete sense that you'd make the connection.
Right. I didn't put it together until this read, and I've read this 4 or 5 times by now. So yeah, but I think it's because I was looking for more references this time than previous reads. So the next thing is, so there's a point brought up on the spoiler cast about if other civilizations have technology similar to Sophon's. There's a lot of talk about communication and not communicating and not broadcasting your or not telling people about your coordinates. I think is really, really fascinating. And the quote is saying, no one knew what other extraterrestrial monitoring equipment might be lurking in the system, and any communication could expose them to danger. So just the whole premise of like how coordinates, like in a really dark forest state where they're at, like exposing your coordinates is like the biggest social faux pas that you can have, similar to asking a woman her age and back in the day. I don't know, did you guys find that part interesting? Did it like spark things in your mind? Like that's one of the things that sticks out to me is like thinking back on this section, just even before I started rereading it, it's just like the nature of just coordinates being the most powerful information that you could have.
I mean, the one thing that the series like never quite answers is why exactly every civilization is so terrified, of each other, and why like it always comes down to conflict, and why everyone is, and
Mm,
why like cooperation doesn't seem to be possible in this universe.
I think that's answered. Yeah.
Yeah, the dark
Yeah.
forest principle kind of answers that, right? Like they talk about like how you have no idea about the motivations of the other ones, so it's better to just fire first. And the major and the biggest motivating factor for anyone is just survival, even as to the point where like they lower themselves to 2 dimensions.
It's further explained in this
Yeah.
chapter more than in the entire Dark Forest book, because if we suppose that these cosmologists are correct and the speed of light was once near infinity, you would be able to observe from very, very far away. You could observe and communicate at such a fast distance. How many stories have ended in tragedy because, it took too long to get the message across somewhere? But it only takes one malevolent actor to, fire too early or attack anyway. It takes one like Wade in any civilization to lower that and make it harder for everyone. And increasingly, you become unable to observe across 16 billion years in a Planck's time. And so, the chains of suspicion start then,
Right.
and then voila, we're back at the dark forest.
It's pretty bleak. I'll give it that.
People are divided on whether this is bleak.
Really.
Yeah, actually, I was surprised about it.
Yeah, it's just kind of sad that, yeah, like well, maybe there are stories of cooperation. This universe could be, full of small pockets of time where there was happy cooperation between civilizations, and then they got blew up by someone else.
I mean, I wouldn't call it happy cooperation, but between Earth and Trisolaris, there was cooperation for some time. It's kind of predicated on lies and and trying and deception. But there was some kind of cooperation. Like Trisolarans could have easily just fired some put our coordinates into space and had us destroyed, but they needed our planet, right? Like I said, it's not friends, but there was definitely more than just a dark forest strike towards us from Trisolaris. So presumably in the other millions and billions of civilizations that are out there in the universe, like there's other stories of cooperation. And this is all takes place in our galaxy, even. Like who knows what happens outside of our galaxy.
That's what was so funny from the Singer chapter. He like glances and says, "Oh, they're practically on top of each other." And it's
Yeah.
funny because in the first and second books, it's like every single chapter heading begins, like, are the Trisolarans here? And it's like 4.2 light years, 4.19 light years. Like it's an interminable amount of time for us. And in fact, they never get here. But to an outside
Right.
perspective, it's like, oh, they're like practically neighbors. They're just right next door.
Yeah, there's even like talk about civilization being like 400 years in the future. I can't think about that. That's too far. Like, let's just worry about now. And then like in the galactic time scale, 400 years is nothing, right? It's like a blink of an eye.
Well, that's a constant theme throughout I think all of the books is yeah, humans like trading short-term happiness for making the right move on a long-term scale. Like how many times do we get humans rationalizing, well, like we're going to be able to like live out our lives in relative peace. That's good enough for us.
Right.
If that choice is even offered to you, because Changxin and Guan Yifan thought, we just talked on the radio, we're going to hop down, it'll be 10 minutes, and it ends up being 18 million years. I think when I was trying to read this passage in Chinese, which is very, very slow for me, I think they actually use an idiom to talk about the length of time, or rather, it's translated in English as, a moment here, tens of thousands of years out there if they're orbiting at light speed. I totally
Mhm.
forgot about this idiom until now, so my pronunciation is going to be bad, but I think it's 沧海桑田, and it's like the sea turns into mulberry fields instead of 1 year here, many years out there. It's just like in the blink of an eye, the landmarks that you'd live your life by. Like I always know that there's a sea. If I go out to the coast, there's an ocean. And if you just woke up and suddenly that was a mulberry field or something different, it's unsettling. It's uneasy. because you didn't get to make that choice. Yeah.
And the planet even turns different colors when they go back.
Right, and the mountains are gone.
Yeah.
They land in the same place, and they're like, are you sure?
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess when we was hop into talking about the Pocket Universe themselves, Tim, you had mentioned that you thought that was an interesting construct. That I guess, what other thoughts do you have there around the Pocket Universes?
I mean, I found it like a little cliched in that it kind of like resets to this pastoral setting, but it's also kind of what I would like expect for a pocket universe to house humans and appeal to human sensibilities. I thought it was a cliched, but like I don't know what else you would do with it. I thought the fact that Sophon was there was a little interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean I also thought that too, but it was built by, or it was commissioned by Tianming and the Trisolarans. So, and
Right.
they presumably have a bunch of these Sophon robots, and they share a consciousness somehow. I think it works that way.
So I suppose this kind of does, represent at the end of at the end of all life, or like not all life, but at the end of the universe, some representation of cooperation between civilizations here, kind of going against my point earlier that.
And I think there was a mention later on that they had hoped that like once all the pocket universes like emerge in the new universe, that they would all kind of meet up and work together, because they basically would be from the same time, and there was a hope there if that was to happen. So there's a little bit more who knows if it actually happened, right? But
also always begs the question of what exists outside of the universe. This is just still one, what medium can this possibly exist in outside of the universe?
Right.
That's just one thing the one thing you kind of have to take it for granted here. And, maybe the biggest mystery of all that he maybe doesn't have an answer for is like, how can something exist outside of the universe? What does it, what houses it, what it is like what's the medium? What's the fabric of the medium that exists outside of the universe?
I kind of like how very non-metaphorical he is. Like, paint people into pictures means, turn them into pictures. Excerpts from a past outside of time. Literally, it's a memoir from something that was outside of time. I don't think he imagines anything outside of the universe more than just outside.
Yeah, well, I mean, because you can't. That's kind of where the limits of our imagination can go to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, isn't there a theory that like the universe is actually like 11-dimensional, but they only talk about like 10 dimensions. So
you can't get past 10 because you have to consider everything. So if you consider anything else, then you violated your own axiom.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I can't think past 2 dimensions, much as 3 sometimes. But
maybe that's the threat that Guan Yifan has. He says, I don't even believe that, but they say there are some parts in the universe, not just where the laws of physics are changed or broken, but even the fundamentals of mathematics. And Chengxin can't even imagine that. I think you mentioned like it's hard to imagine that that the author could resist writing about 10 dimensions. Like, how could he not want to talk about the Edenic age? I think he kind of skirts the line. He makes us think about what if there were no like principles of math. And I think that's like the opposite of the Edenic age. Like, that would be the ugliest thing in the universe. I don't know if you've solved some kind of math problem or remember doing it, like even in grade school. There's just this real like satisfying understanding. Like, oh, that's elegant. That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Something about pi or geometry. But if you could imagine, like, what if, I don't know, like a series of partial sums tending towards a limit like didn't converge, like there would just be no satisfaction or beauty or elegance. So I think that's probably the ugliest thing in the universe, if 10 dimensions is like the Edenic age.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience, like where math, like I've never been great at math, but like, when you understand something and like how you understand like how the system comes together. Yes, I think it's the reason I like programming so much, just because like things make sense, as you put them together. And math is like, similar to that, where, you figure out a way to do it and it just kind of like opens up your mind, right?
Exactly.
So if that doesn't hold true in all scenarios or certain parts of the universe, or people are
then suicide
somehow
looks pretty attainable.
somehow attacking that. It's like, yeah, how could you even like make sense of anything, especially to a scientific mind, right?
But to the converse is a 10-dimensional universe as he, attempts to describe it, where the speed of light is infinity and you can go from one end of the cosmos to the other. Is that like, what is life? What is life there? Is life kind of like, what is there to explore there? What, like what makes, like, is it just too perfect? Is there just nothing, like, are you all knowing?
It's like God mode, right?
Yeah, it's like, is it so heaven-like that it's just boring? Like, what challenge is there? What is there to learn, to discover?
People are divided on the end of this book, whether it's bleak or hopeful or just purely ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, we're not beings built for 10 dimensions. That is as alien and terrifying and, like, to me, as no dimensions in a sense, because I have no way of perceiving that. Or so a me that goes from 3 dimensions to a me that goes to 10 dimensions, what is that? Am I the same being? Is that still death for me?
I'm just going to sneak in this plug for Asimov, as we are starting our next show to be the Asimov Foundations. I think he has a quote about this. So Asimov says, "Life is pleasant. Death is peaceful. It's the transition that's troublesome." I think that the transition that they choose in Death's End is like, I don't see the ending as bleak because I find it remarkable. They get to choose, shall I stay here in perfect safety, or shall I go out and try and answer those questions Tim brought up? And it's, it's simple, but it's impactful. And I think, I don't know, it ties up the series quite well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different endings too, right? That make it up. There's the personal ending of Chengxin and Guan Yifan, and I guess Sofan. What their experiences are going to be like after they leave their pocket universe and experience whatever the current state of the universe is. And they're obviously not going to see the end of the universe because humans aren't going to last that long. Human life is only so many years, right? And the end of the universe is probably billions of years away still. But there's also like the more universal ending. Do you think that enough people actually return their matter to the universe, like had the same human perspective on things to want to save the universe? Or will they be more selfish and keep the matter in the pocket universes themselves? But then because they are more selfish or more, thinking about survival, the universe will just, experience heat death and never, never come back and make a new Big Bang. So you'll never see that new universe again. So that's a little bit more up in the air. But I always saw like Chengxin and Guan Yifan's story as more hopeful or more of a happy story, where they get to explore the universe for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I didn't take it as a downer ending. I mean, it's downer on a macro scale, just as far as how bleak the universe is and how it operates. But as far as their personal stories, it wasn't bleak to me. Plus the added possibility of human civilization living on. But yeah, I agree with you that the one outstanding question that could be bleak is if the universe doesn't collapse in on itself, which I think this is kind of like the last example throughout this whole series of kind of dealing with like both humans and alien civilizations as a whole, their sort of inability to govern their environment or make good, obviously their inability to cooperate, their inability to like not let the externalities of their actions like pretty much destroy the universe or degrade the universe, as we kind of like learned here that constant warring and constant use of these dimensional attacks has essentially degraded the state of the universe. And it's hard to not see that as something of an allegory for like the way humans are now facing climate change and the sort of tragedy of the commons on like a universal scale. And I don't know if he's explicitly making an allegory to climate change, because again, that's just the most like immediate and obvious example that a human living in current times is going to come
That's
to.
the great filter that seems to be ahead of us. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, like at the end here, yeah, there's still that question of whether civilizations can make the right decision and sort of accept responsibility.
Or even down to individuals. Like you mentioned before, like the fate of the universe could rest on whether one individual decides to literally shovel dirt. Like that's it. If you operate at this scale, your individual decisions can have an impact on the fate of the universe.
Yeah, and this isn't this isn't an original theme in science fiction, but this is kind of a good example of it, in that as a universe, evolves high intelligence civilizations, does that also spell is the act, or so the phenomenon of evolving high intelligence civilizations
Mm-hmm.
also the thing that like spells its own doom, in that the thing, the only thing eventually that kind of upsets those constant, those Edenic constants, or those, that pristine state that is like self-sustaining, is intelligence, essentially,
Oh
is
boy, you
some
should read
point.
The Gods Themselves. You should read the Asimov book. It's a quick read. It's fun.
Right. But yeah, the brains, well, human brains, or whatever counts as a brain for an alien, is the sort of unmaking, like represents like the starting point of the unmaking of the universe.
Well, the good news is that for us, we made the list on
Yeah.
the universal list of languages of civilizations. We
Hell
made the
yeah.
list. We're millions of languages in, but we made it. So good job, humans.
Yep.
How would it mean? I mean, what did you think of the ending? How do you perceive it?
I thought it was fine, but really to me it was, and maybe I'm misunderstanding how the mass of the universe part worked, but to me it seemed like kind of a prisoner's dilemma, where they had to assume that the other micro universes inhabitants were going to do the same thing,
Yeah.
because and I think that puts a lot of trust and faith in other people and other alien civilizations and whoever is in the other ones. But yeah, I thought it was fine.
I think that trust is kind of baked into Changqing's character, though, right? Like
Yeah,
yeah, like that's a well established that's
It's
her.
a move
That's
that makes sense for her to make. Yeah.
yeah. I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm saying I wouldn't make that decision because I don't trust people that much.
That is the prisoner's dilemma. I mean,
Yeah. I thought it was fine. Again, I thought following AA would have been more interesting, only because I don't think Cheng Xin's that interesting of a character, I guess.
but they're
Or
both
Yeah.
motes of dust. Like, why does it matter which one you follow? They're like individual humans on the scale of billions
well,
and billions of years.
that's true. So I guess it doesn't matter.
But yeah, I think that's the even bigger tragedy of them not meeting up, is that AA and Changqing don't get to meet back with each other. More than Yan Tianming. I care more about their relationship, I think.
But yeah, I think from Cheng Xin's and Guan Yufan's perspective, even in that pocket universe, like there's not a whole lot of hope there, in that it's a very limited environment. What are you going, are you going to have children and then they're just going to like continue on in this tiny, tiny little world? Like it seems kind of depressing to stay. Like it
Well, they
doesn't
said
seem like that's a good fate.
they said it's only gonna be like 10 years between in their time reference that until the universe resets, or
Right.
they're expecting. So like they don't need to stay there forever. They're just hoping to hold out there until the collapse, right? And then they'll have the life in the new 10-dimensional universe.
I mean, it seems like they made the best decision. Like that's like I feel like that's the decision I would like would make, that we're gonna leave 5 kilograms left. That thankfully we can record all of human civilization and human thought into this 5 kilograms, or whatever
Yeah.
whatever is left, and then we can go on, at least have one more space adventure, instead of just kind of twiddling our thumbs for 10 more years here.
Yeah, they made the same decision as the princess and the captain of the guard in the fairy tales. Like, we'll just
Right.
leave everything behind. We'll never be able to come back. We'll seek our fortune, and no one will know what happens to us, or at least no one that we knew before.
Well, there's no one left to know what happened to
Yeah, but I just,
unless maybe there are some. Well, that's what you would want to find out. Are there some, human civilizations after 18
perhaps.
million years still hanging out there, and what do they look like?
Probably not, but yeah, who knows?
No, but it would be, extremely interesting. Like, I would want to know what 18 million, like what those ravages of time look like more than I
Right.
would rather have
Maybe the
10 more years of
dinosaurs
just kind of, yeah.
escaped into a pocket universe and we'll get to meet them.
So speaking of 18 million years, in the beginning of this book, I had advised Tim not to, or I advised all readers and Tim not to look at the table of eras. Did you go back and look at the table of eras?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. So in the table of eras, at the end of it, they have two eras. They say Black Domain era for DX3906 system, 2687 until 18 million something, and then timeline for universe 647, 18 million something to ... So I don't know. I consider that to be a spoiler because it kind of, and maybe that's like hindsight because I know what happens. If you had read that we would see the eras go into 18 millions. Would that have potentially been a spoiler for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it would just give you an idea of the scope of this, story and where it's going. And I kind of had, I said at the beginning, this is not how I expected it to end, but I had an idea that it might end, with something like this extrapolating, the way the scope of the series had, expanding, kind of extrapolating that, it wouldn't have been a huge surprise. But yeah, I think I was happy not knowing that. Like, I don't think I would have rather seen that timestamp.
Right. And that the chapter, like if you look at the table of contents in the chapter, they're even more specific. There's a lot of them that like give specifically like the, what happens in that chapter. Like, they need to be better about that, I think.
Yeah, no, I explicitly like read this on Kindle, kind of so I wouldn't accidentally like flip through something and see something else. Which also, like on a Kindle, it makes it hard to like go back and reread chapters, which is why I'm sometimes forgetful about things. I figured I would just like limit the scope of what I was reading for that week to just those passages, which is easy on a Kindle, but and keeps you unspoiled for the future. Also makes the past chapters, especially if they were weeks and weeks ago, seem a little distant and hard to go back to.
Yeah. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the series. We talked a lot about this book so far. We're already an hour in, but I want to talk more about the series in general, because now we're all finished with the series. We all know the same amount of information. Tim, you brought up a couple times that you'd want to see like the description of the Trisolarans, and obviously we don't get that. Do you feel disappointed we didn't get that?
Not necessarily, because that's obviously not the story he was telling at this point. Like, I am always interested in like in that and the physiology and biology, or the conceptualizations of other aliens, but that's simply not the point of the story he was telling here. And I came to understand that. Like, it would have been neat, but it's not like a disappointment.
Yeah. So I will say that there is a fan fiction book that was written that has sort of the blessing of Lucian that does describe the Trisolarans, and yeah, I don't know. It's not that great.
I mean, my state of mind after, say, the first book, to find out that you never, like, would have been disappointment, because that's kind of what I expected at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's the story expanded and took turns. I mean, that's just simply not the story he was telling. So
I think it's funny that we do discuss like Mundicide and there's trials and considerations. And then in the Singer chapter, like the whole concept of persecuting someone for that is just laughable. Like they'd be persecuted for not committing it. So it's funny to see that in a different perspective. No, I am always interested in getting other people's perspective on the series, and it's just a real treat to be on a show where now everyone has read and there's no spoilers possible.
Yeah, so that reminds me, so as I was reading the series, like I kept noticing crimes against humanity getting mentioned often, and it's like, man, there's a lot of crimes against humanity. So like as I was like making my notes for the podcast, I kept a running list of the crimes against humanity. So we have escapism, Frederick Tyler's plan, probably is crimes against humanity. They don't really explicitly say it. Diaz's plan definitely was a crime against humanity. Escapism again after the droplet and then the Battle of Darkness. Using radio communications after the knowledge of the Dark Forest is a crime against humanity. Bronze Age's role in the Battle of Darkness, Crimes Against Humanity, the ESS role in helping the Trisolarans during the Great Resettlement, the photoid observer thinking that giving humans a mere 24 hours of a photoid attack is a crime against humanity. And finally, Thomas Wade was convicted of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and violations of the laws prohibiting research into curvature propulsion. Very liberally used crimes against humanity for something that we consider to be pretty much like the biggest thing you can do. But there's quite a few of them.
But yeah, and where the series goes, like it like progressively makes all of those like crimes of humanity, and all of those, in the moment, which seem like enormous events, seem smaller and smaller and smaller and less significant as it goes on.
Right. Yeah, and not only that, but like they're wrong, right? Escapism was the way of survival, right? not a crime against humanity, but like it's the only way that humanity was able to survive was by having the galactic humans like go out and explore space. So most of these are null, and and also curvature propulsion was like the way to escape the dark forest strike. So most of these are not even really crimes in hindsight. But again, the small thinking of humans and the limited perspective. So I kind of want to go over just some general thoughts around the series and and see what you guys think. So first thing I'm interested in is like, what is your favorite book of the series? And we'll start with Talia.
My favorite book of the series remains the third book. I do think it's richer. There's less just waiting around like the entire first half of the second book. I think a lot of action happens packed into the second half of the second book and to the final chapter of the third book. So I think the pacing is better in the third book. And I also, as evidenced by like the shooter hypothesis making sense and things from the first book finally being relevant again, I think it just wraps up the whole series. And so it's more than the sum of its parts. So I wouldn't necessarily just read the third book in isolation, but it is unqualified still my favorite.
How about Amin?
I think the three body problem, the first book, was my favorite.
Interesting.
I guess I'm glad I read the other two, but if I just read that one, I would have been just fine with it. I thought that one did the best job of building mystery and tension and suspense into it. Just because until the very end, you didn't actually know anything about the Trisolarans, and I thought the other ones we got, they were less evenly paced in my opinion. But I thought the first one was the one I would recommend people read, even if they don't read the other two.
Interesting. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, it seems like a somewhat common perspective out there that it seems like there's a lot of people who like the first book, but don't like the rest of the series. I don't agree with that. I sort of agree with both Amina and Talia's points about like the different I agree that the first book that's what I like about the first book the most is the sense of mystery to it and the way it sets that up, and like the way it kind of like lets your imagination run wild, or at least provides a lot of like fodder for that. And the second the book two, I completely agree with Talia. The first half of the book is, if I hadn't been reading this for assignment, might be where I would have checked out. And then the second half, from like a page turner, pure like I can't wait to see what happens next, was probably my favorite part of the whole series. So it's like an extremely uneven book, and that it kind of shifts from maybe my least favorite to my most favorite, just kind of part of the whole series.
That's cool.
And the third book is it's a lot to take in. It's a lot of interesting parts jammed together, a lot of big events, a lot of cool settings that we often observe at just kind of a distance, like things that could be their own settings in themselves. Australia, the Bunker Project. It is absolutely the most interesting book, like overall. Like it wraps up so much. Like I can't imagine me personally just reading the first book and just kind of like leaving it there, because there's like too much because I need to know. But yeah, I would say I like the first book. The third book overall, like just kind of taking in the series of a whole, as a whole, and just like the compilation of things that happen there. Yeah, it's hard for me to give you a straight answer on that because but I find the second half of book 2 the most enjoyable from from a page turner like perspective, because I was just interested in the world building of that future world and of the more direct interstellar conflict between the Trisolarans and the humans. And in fiction in general, like I tend to read fantasy more because the thing that like more like directly compels me to read something has more usually involves more like intercharacter drama set against like settings that have like a lore and a history to them, and fantasy tends to like deal with that more so than like sci-fi. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of parts to the series where like I would have liked to have seen, like you could even like for example the Parker Project, like, and that like series of like space stations, like that was a really interesting setting to me. A like sci-fi novel, that would be like more like immediately like compelling to me, would be something like set in that setting, that's kind of what The Expanse kind of is. It's just this
Yeah.
kind of like like solar, like series of interesting, like how do we survive in this space,
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
yeah,
I love The Expanse too, just for the more realistic setting of like what it would actually be like to live in a spacefaring,
right.
kind of
And
race.
I kind of come to fantasy and sci-fi a lot for that kind of immersion. And
Yeah,
there are times, like there are times when this series like provides hints of that, like I said, the second half of the second book, and then it kind of moves past that. So I'm really glad I read this, and I glad I read this as part of assignment reading. I guess like kind of like because there are certain points where like it was not an immediate page turner for me, like the first half of Dark Forest. So
yeah. I think
I
a lot of people turn off when they get to the Jonghyun part. It's like, what are you doing? What do I need to hear about your imaginary girlfriend?
Right. Yeah, I guess I guess my question to you guys, like if you've done reading for assignment versus reading for pure pleasure, like how does that affect how you like evaluate a book? And I've come to after this experience, like I think having a mix of both is a good thing to have, because you don't want to necessarily just limit yourself to what is popcorn to you, essentially, because if you kind of like force yourself to move past that, you'll come to something very maybe interesting or more thought provoking that you wouldn't have come to.
Yeah, I'll say for me, I'm not a very prolific reader and to begin with. So assignment reading not only just to kind of forces me to do it, and the format of this show also helps me more analyze what I'm reading rather than just kind of reading it and like kind of maybe not paying attention all the time when you're reading. I'm sure everyone's had that experience. Like you read a bunch of stuff and like, what the hell did I just read? And like you have to go back and reread it. So by having to make notes and analyze what's actually happening to really think about stuff in the full context, I think made the experience better for me personally. And that's, why I want to continue the show and continue more series that I haven't read. So I won't lose interest or, get lazy or that kind of stuff, or just watch, mindless TV instead of actually like reading these books that I've always, should have read.
I think you mentioned it on your interview with Priya, where you talked about the spoiler cast, and I think she was asking like, "Oh, so is the intention to like spoil it for other people?" And you sort of admitted like, "Well, it's a place where I can talk about this book with people who have also read
Right.
it." It's the forum for that. I haven't read on assignment like probably since school. So, oh, and then I started reading on assignment since about March 2020. Can't remember why, but I did have a couple of reading groups, and now this podcast. And I do think it helps for me to have some kind of structure, particularly if you're not just like if you're scrolling through Netflix and you click on anything, there's no like obligation to finish. Like at least as I've gotten older, I don't like watching bad shows. I'll turn off bad movies. But if I know that someone else, is expecting me to discuss it, then, I'll keep at it.
Yeah, for me, the one, and there's no way to do this and have a podcast, but sometimes I wanted to read more than was scheduled to read. It was like, oh, this is like Dan picked some really good stopping points, and I was like, well, shoot, I wish we could read more. And then other times it just felt long, and I wish I could read less. I think that's the one thing it forced me to do, is like to stick on a schedule like that. But I think talking about the book obviously helped me get through it. But I guess being able to, and of course you can't do it when you have 4 different people reading as much as they want to read. But that was the thing. Like sometimes I wanted to read more, and other times I wanted to read less.
Yeah, I think getting back to the original question is favorite book, and for myself, I still consider Death's End to be definitely my favorite. Just the grand scope of the book and all the scientific ideas, just like in the fairy tales themselves, like everything about that book, I just loved, and it's the reason that I wanted to make you guys read it too, and talk about it and have a chance to talk about it. And I think that's a lot of experience. The question I have for Talia is: did your opinion change on reading the books? The order of mine changed a little bit. Like I would go back and forth. Like Death End was always my favorite. But I'll go back and forth. The same 3-body problem is my second favorite, or Dark Force my second favorite. And I right currently, as it stands, rereading it and kind of analyzing it, I'm kind of settled on Death's End, Dark Forest, and 3-body problem in that in that order. How about you? Did your I guess analysis or opinion of the series or your favorite ordering change based on reread?
That's a really good question. I do think it has shifted, partially because I get to listen to people who write in and people who interview, and I get to see a few new perspectives. And I did think that 3-body was, was my entry point to the series. It was what I read, before I went to China. So it was separated from the rest of the other 2 books by some chunk of time. Whereas once I picked up the second one, I immediately read through to the third. And going back a little bit more methodically, I think it did change and made me appreciate Dark Forest, despite its lurching narrative and inconsistent pacing, probably right behind Death's End. So I think now I have settled on 3, 2, 1 for my preferences as well.
Yeah, I think like initially I didn't appreciate the sociological aspects as much when I first read it, and as I did on the subsequent readings. And I think that's why, even though the pacing in Dark Forest is definitely off and inconsistent, but just the ideas that are brought up, I think are among my favorites now. I mean,
it also just seems more fun. Like I look back at the second book and I'm like, yeah, I'd love to see them make a movie so I can like hang out with Da Shi or like wonder about the droplet again. I just think it's more fun than, I don't know, the whole video game. Ready Player One did that. There's a number of, like, Ender's Game did that. It's been done. It's out there. Didn't blow my socks off.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like the 3-body problem actual parts, were often read. Like I like the overall mystery of that the first book set up, but those parts to me were often to me like, for example, when you get like long flashback scenes in other books, and you're like, like every time I got to like a 3-body problem part or chapter, it was just like, oh God, this again. Like that, even though that's the whole like conceit of the first book is this VR game, those sections, and there's too many of those sections, and
totally,
and they kind of like killed the pacing a bit for, because you kind of understood what it was, fairly early on, and it kind of goes back there a few too many times.
Totally, yeah. If they would, I was glad they stopped with it after a while. Like I was glad it didn't. I was assuming that would be the entire book would be like interstitial chapters of going to the game, and I'm glad it stopped like halfway or a little after halfway.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have heard this because I only brought it up on the spoiler cast, but Cixin Liu actually does have a favorite of his 3 books.
And what's that?
He says, my publisher and I reached the conclusion that since it was impossible for the 3rd volume to succeed in the market, maybe it was best to give up trying to attract readers who are not already science fiction fans. Instead, I would write a pure, in quotes, science fiction novel, which I found comforting, as I considered myself a hardcore fan. And so I wrote the 3rd volume for myself and filled it with multidimensional and 2-dimensional universes, artificial black holes, and mini universes, and I extended the timeline to the heat death of the universe. And to our utter surprise, it was this third volume, written only for science fiction fans, which led to the popularity of the series as a whole.
Yeah, so it's
Like, he wrote the Cultural Revolution stuff to be relatable, but it wasn't. It was like the expansion of the, universe that was actually more interesting than something that was assumed to be relatable. So that's his favorite.
no, I like that part. I like the way the series starts with the Cultural Revolution stuff.
Yikes.
I thought it was
I
actually
do
pretty.
not.
You know,
No,
um,
I don't.
I mean, I thought it, it was compelling reading, to start off the series for me. But yeah, I mean, we've brought it up time and time again in this series that like this series is him throwing like this is a maximalist series. This is like everything plus the kitchen sink, like thrown into there, and that kind of that quote kind of confirms it, that it was just him putting everything he wanted to put in there, and series sure, especially the last book, sure reflects that.
Yeah. All right. Well, since we wrapped it up, this has been a long endeavor now. So I wanted to put together some quick stats around just the kind of production effort that went into it. So we've had 45 episodes, including main spoilercast and interview episodes, totaling 34 hours, 5 minutes and 28 seconds of published time, which I did a quick calculation, and it's roughly around 94 seconds per page of the series. That's a lot of podcasting. I didn't track the time it took to edit it, but it's probably in the order of like 3 times that. We have 1.855 gigabytes of MP3s out there for people to download, 2 applications that are developed by myself and Jim. So we have the website, and we also have an update tool for the website to do that. And finally, the summary document, the document that I use to generate all the summaries for all of the episodes, is 69 pages long with 33,740 words. So that's why my summary is always so long. It takes so long to do. And finally, I just want to say thanks to all the people who made this podcast possible. So first of all, Tim and Amin, thank you very much for joining me in this, like humoring me and going along every week or every 2 weeks to do this. It's just really fun to talk to you guys about this series. Thank you, Talia, for being first interview guest and then helping co-host a spoiler cast. Really appreciate that. Pri and Frank also for being interview guests and co-hosting this main show. Jim, who joined us on the initial season and helped a lot with the kind of back end work. Josh, Yilmaz, and Adam, who were my interview guests. Sandra, my wife, who did a lot of Chinese translations, and she did the intro to season 1. Reddit, as a general whole, I've gotten so much useful information out of Reddit and the people in conversations, and met Talia and Priya and a bunch of other people, and Frank and a bunch of other people on Reddit itself. It's been an enormous source of information and topics to discuss. So I really appreciate that. And finally, the listeners, for all people who have listened, subscribe, or will subscribe in the future. Really appreciate your time and feedback. It's been a lot of fun to do this series that I love, and I got a chance to share with everybody. So really appreciate it. And again, thank you very much for listening. Please check out rehydrate.space for release episodes, reading lists, pronunciation guides, and all the other stuff that we put on there. And leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter at rehydratepod. And join us next episode for the start of the new season and the new series, which will be season 6, episode 1, The Psychohistorians and the Encyclopedists, covering part 1 and 2 of the first book of the Foundation trilogy, Foundation, by Isaac Asimov.